Dorothy Hirsch, born 1935, lived in Berlin, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944 at the age of 9. Zulem Spitalnik, born 1936, lived in Warsaw, killed by the Nazis in Warsaw in 1941 at the age of 5. Chaim Weinberger, born 1934, lived in Trebizond, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1942 at the age of 8. Isaac Glussman, born 1935, killed by the Nazis in Kratonek in 1941 at the age of 6. Isaac Weinberg, born 1939, lived in Ostrazek, killed by the Nazis in Ostrazek at the age of 1. Syoma Weissman, born 1935, lived in Khmelnyk, killed by the Nazis in Khmelnyk in 1942 at the age of 7. Lottie Stahl, lived in Nitra, killed by the Nazis at the age of 9. Violette Levy, lived in Marseille, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944 at the age of 2. Lech Weissman, lived in Lwów, killed by the Nazis in Reswato in 1940 at the age of 8. Rewika Rice, born 1934, lived in Forbach, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1943 at the age of 9. Nelly Ukelzen, born 1936, lived in Odessa, killed by the Nazis in Odessa in 1943 at the age of 5. Tamara Fell, lived in Bar, killed by the Nazis in Bar in 1942 at the age of 2. Solomia Weiss, lived in Lwów, killed by the Nazis in Lwów in 1942 at the age of 7. Nicole Block, lived in Lee, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz at the age of 4. Menduka Weiss, lived in Ketamesso, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944 at the age of 3. Model Voloshko, born 1938, lived in Brzezinec, killed by the Nazis in Trostalianets in 1941 at the age of 3. Moist Javir, lived in Didamonacan, killed by the Nazis in Birkenau in 1943 at the age of 7. Elik Mermenstein, lived in Yampol, killed by the Nazis in Yampol in 1941 at the age of 8. Itzi Streibman, born 1940, lived in Opatow, killed by the Nazis at the age of 2. Solomo Brezniak, born 1937, lived in Plashtzin, killed by the Nazis in Majdanek in 1943 at the age of 6. Dotia Tativesky, born 1939, lived in Berdichev, killed by the Nazis in Berdichev in 1941 at the age of 2. Sally Aronowicz, born 1934, lived in Cernowitz, killed by the Nazis in Mogilev Podolsky in 1942 at the age of 8. Chaim Wolcinovich, born 1943, lived in Miskolc, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944 at the age of 1. Jolan Engel, born 1940, lived in Senta, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944 at the age of 4. Liba Simkovich, lived in Melitopol, killed by the Nazis in Konstantinovka in 1941 at the age of 8. Ben Sion Borrower, lived in Lodz, killed by the Nazis in Lodz at the age of 10. Vaj Lakamanovich, born 1939, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944 at the age of 5. Jenta Glansberg, born 1938, lived in Sokal, killed by the Nazis in Sokal in 1943 at the age of 5. Jutta Ladendorf lived in Allenstein, killed by the Nazis at the age of 5. Gilta Hipser lived in Sosnowiec, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1943 at the age of 5. Ajike Fried lived in Cluj, killed by the Nazis in Birkenau in 1944 at the age of 5. Marcela Swarnova, killed by the Nazis in Mali Trostenic in 1942 at the age of 5. Raicio Friedman, 1942, lived in Wow, killed by the Nazis in Wow in 1942 at the age of 1. Chaim Weizmann, born 1936, lived in Warsaw, killed by the Nazis in Treblinka in 1942 at the age of 6. Isidor Goldstein lived in Sofia, killed by the Nazis in Dachau at the age of 8. Annette Gleiser, born 1933, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1942 at the age of 9. Mose Jakobovics, born 1935, lived in Helmy, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1944 at the age of 8. Zoya Gildenberg, born 1934, lived in Minsk, killed by the Nazis in Minsk in 1941 at the age of 7. Volochka Gershengorn, born 1938, lived in Kiev, killed by the Nazis in Babi Yar in 1941 at the age of 3. Georgi Winter lived in Rosneo, killed by the Nazis in Birkenau in 1944 at the age of 1. Carlo Cohen lived in Kavala, killed by the Nazis in Treblinka in 1943 at the age of 5. Iosif Zadovnik, born 1937, lived in Minsk, killed by the Nazis in Borisov in 1941 at the age of 4. Israel Zichner, born 1932, lived in Mako, killed in Auschwitz by the Nazis at the age of 10. Herschel Zerny, born 1932, lived in Slakov, killed by the Nazis in 1942 at the age of 7. Toli Shamison, born 1932, lived in Ataki, killed by the Nazis in 1941 at the age of 9. Seisman Friedman, born 1938, lived in Al-Quds, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz in 1942 at the age of 4. Laura Strauss lived in Eccles, killed by the Nazis at the age of 6. Mary Frances lived in Kavala, killed by the Nazis in Treblinka in 1943 at the age of 1. Mozik Spitalnik, born 1938, lived in Lodz, killed by the Nazis at the age of 5. Yuta Kozever, born 1933, lived in Rudimino, killed by the Nazis in Welikarni in 1941 at the age of 8. Pearl Younger, born 1942, killed by the Nazis in Birkenau in 1944 at the age of 2. Yosef Sabeti, born 1939, lived in Varaya, killed by the Nazis in Birkenau in 1943 at the age of 4. Yakov Zemet, born 1937, lived in Krakow, killed by the Nazis in Bochnia in 1943 at the age of 6. Henio Spalter, born 1937, lived in Borislaw, killed by the Nazis in Borislaw in 1942 at the age of 5. Ichok Zukowski, born 1933, lived in Zumbrau, killed by the Nazis in 1943 at the age of 10. Yuda Olevesevich, born 1936, lived in Kherson, killed by the Nazis in Kherson in 1941 at the age of 5. Moshe Rothstein, born 1934, lived in Wilno, killed by the Nazis in Ponary in 1943 at the age of 9. Luca Lowy, born 1935, lived in Bosani, killed by the Nazis in 1942 at the age of 7. Yakov Helfner, born 1940, Tarnow, lived in Tarnow, killed by the Nazis in Tarnow in 1942 at the age of 2. Kisya Abramovic lived in Timkovichi, killed by the Nazis in Timkovichi in 1942 at the age of 8.